I just want to point out I am wide awake this morning. I have to be that way on the job, unlike Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Meinhof, who fell asleep last night during the State of the Union. But likewise, a lot of other people had the same reaction. Good cure for insomnia for millions of Americans. And so maybe we should do this actually more often going forward. Well, at least once a year, right? 7 minutes now after 8 o'clock. Thank you for joining me this morning. It is going to be, well, a chilly day, 30 looking at a high of 30 degrees. And right now it's 25. You're listening to Bill Colley, of course, as the big voice just said. And I've got a few things I wanted to talk about today, but we'll get to the top story in just a moment. I will also, if I get a chance, if you let me, I'll talk a little bit about this ping-ponging of gasoline prices going on. Some places, 17 cents a gallon more expensive than it was just a few days ago, even though there was another drop in the price of oil this week. So figure that one out. Speaking of Justice Ruth Bader Meinhof, she contradicted herself in a court ruling on religious faith this week. And if we get an opportunity, I want to share exactly what she did, and perhaps you might agree with that, although her fellow travelers will simply try to rationalize it however they can. But of course, the big story this morning, and it's related to us very much in Delaware, or rather, I forgot where I was already. All right, somebody better come in here and hit me with a mallet. I'm so used to talking about one place I lived for 7 years, which wasn't even my home. And now I'm sitting here and I can't get 2 words out without getting the wrong place. And I know I look around and nothing here looks like it does there. In Idaho, at Boise State University today, the president is going to come and try to offer more bromides in an effort to market his plan from last night. Now, I've got to tell you something. I watched that speech and I'm not a big fan of these canned State of the Union addresses. And in the course of the last 40 years, I think I've watched President Obama do one other. And maybe I watched Ronald Reagan once, and maybe I watched George W. Bush once. Prior to that, it would have been Gerald Ford. So that's how far back I go. And rarely do I watch these things because you can get everything you need to know the morning after as you sift through. But last night I actually sat there and I did a play-by-play on Twitter and on my Facebook account. And I was sitting there putting it all together, and so it allowed me today to write up a short list of just some takeaways. Now, these aren't all of them. If you go to Drudge, you can find that some comments on Drudge already this morning, that frequently the president contradicted himself last night. I have 10 takeaways I listed as I was watching last night, and here they are. Number 1, I ended the wars now, and I want more, or they're over with, right? There's troops still in some of these countries, but they're over with. But he wants more money to fight ISIL, as he calls it. He does not call it ISIS. He calls it ISIL, which ought to tip his hand a little bit, because ISIS, that is what, the Islamic State in Syria? ISIL is the Islamic State in the Levant. The Levant being an old name going back to the Middle Ages for a huge swath of territory, including Jerusalem and currently all of Israel. So he is tipping his hand, referring to this as the Islamic State, as if this is going to be subsuming, conquering, taking over Israel. And you can only imagine if they're shooting young boys, co-religionists, for watching soccer games, what they would do to the Jews if they ever get the chance. But I think the president, when he uses that phrase, that ISIL phrase, is he's sort of tipping his hand as to who he actually deep down in favors in this conflict. 2, at one point, he goaded the Republicans by saying, try living on $15,000 a year. Then he went on to talk a little bit about how he was going to tax Wall Street more. Keep in mind, these people on Wall Street are the ones who finance Democrat Party politics. He's giving away a $500 tax credit, if Congress will approve, to middle-class families. His definition of middle-class families, they make $200,000 a year. So he's just said, look, try to live on $15,000 a year, and by the way, I want to give $500 a year to middle-class families. How far will that $500 go? Well, when he and his wife went to dinner one night in Hawaii a few weeks ago, they spent over $500 on dinner. So there you go. Number 3, oil and gas exploration are up. And you could paraphrase him by saying, I didn't build that. He had absolutely nothing to do with that. In fact, he was opposed to all of this, but he couldn't control a lot of what was going on private lands, which is where most of the natural gas and oil exploration of the last 15, 20 years has taken place in this country. Number 4, he kept saying we need to work together. And then he would turn around and talk about his veto pen. So, again, another contradiction. He suggested that the woman's right to choose must endure. This is a big week in Washington. There will be 500,000 people demonstrating there to overturn Roe v. Wade. But he never talks about the choice that a baby might get. In fact, he favors letting a baby die if it comes out alive in one of these late-term abortions. 6, he says college is going to be free. 0 was the word he used last night. So we are to assume then staff and faculty won't be paid, buildings won't be painted, grass won't be mowed. So if you're going to have it free, you can't spend any money on anything else on the campus. So that's how it works, right? Also, he mentioned he got elected twice. He was trying to, when he mentioned it, he was going to be out of office soon. The Republicans cheered, so he taunted them by saying he got elected twice. But the reason the taunting was so loud from the Republicans is because the Republicans took both houses of Congress while he was president. So there you go. I think that negates whatever he's talking about. Number 8, I'll get Wall Street is going to soak them, although until it gives my party more satchels of campaign cash. Number 9, Islam is peaceful. Get me more drones. And of course, lastly, Fidel is my kinsman. Do we need to say anything more on that one? So there you have it. That was my take on what I happened to be watching last night. And as soon as it was over, I went to bed. I didn't even stay up to watch Joni Ernst. Nothing against her, but I thought I'd had enough for the evening, and I do get up early in the morning. So when the speech came to a sudden stop a little after 8 o'clock, I turned off the TV, turned off the lights, and I was asleep within 10 minutes. This morning, the reviews are coming in from some places that to me seem interesting and downright unique in some cases. I'm a subscriber to the online edition of the Washington Post, not because I favor that newspaper, but because I have several news sources, a couple that I subscribe to and several others that I get emailed to me every morning, so I can do a quick rundown and see what's going on locally and around the world. There are 2 writers today who are just chewing the president to pieces at the Washington Post, and they're not conservatives. One is a guy by the name of Dana Milbank, and the other is Eugene Robinson, who is an all-out sycophant for President Obama. In fact, Robinson is a regular on the Morning Joe program on MSDNC, and he often does everything he can. I mean, he had his knee pads on last night, offering the president a Lewinsky. You would think that was what was going to happen before the speech, and after the speech, Mr. Robinson is disappointed. Maybe disillusioned is a better word. But he and Milbank, who have both been carrying the water for this White House for the last 6-7 years, they're now turning around and saying, well, you know what? Maybe something's wrong here. And I get to page 2. There's a column. That's the sound of it you're hearing. Page 2 of Eugene Robinson's column. You remember the Marvin the Martian character in the old Bugs Bunny movies? You know, oh, Earth, I'm going to destroy the Earth. He sounds just like that. Eugene Marvin the Martian Robinson. He writes the foreign policy speech will have to wait for another day. And then he goes on to say the president declared the Afghanistan war over, which is great. He repeated his promise to, quote, degrade and ultimately destroy, unquote, the Islamic State. And he asks, will the pro-Western Afghan government survive? This is coming from the columnist. How does the president intend to proceed in Iraq and Syria? He was right to call for Congress to pass a resolution authorizing the use of force against the Islamic State, but said nothing specific about what legislation should say. The president, he writes, mentioned Russian aggression, but not the explicit fact that Crimea has been snatched away from Ukraine, apparently permanently. And he says, we heard very little about Iran, given the stakes. He's apparently okay with the Iranian nuclear program going on. He said at one point during the speech that we had held Russia in check. Huh? All right, so they seized Crimea and a big chunk of Ukraine, and they may not be done. But by golly, I showed them. I went out there and I told Mr. Putin. Here's Vladimir Putin, by the way, who's riding around on horseback, bare-chested on horseback, with a rifle slung over his shoulder while he's going hunting, and he's fishing, and he's playing ice hockey. And here's President Obama. You ever see those pictures on Drudge where they show you that image of Putin doing something outdoorsy like that, and then they'll put the picture of President Obama on vacation up at Martha's Vineyard where the president is riding a girl's bike and he's got the bike helmet on? Look, I have a bike helmet myself, and I have a couple of bicycles. There is nothing geekier than a bicycle helmet. I wear it because I feel it's a necessity. If I had a little bit more money, I'd go buy a really good motorcycle helmet and wear that on my bicycle, but that might look even sillier. But it does tell you something about the difference between number one here in America and number one over there in the other country. We've come a long way. Jay Leno used to joke about the old communist leaders in the Soviet Union. He used to joke that, in fact, right after we had a couple of them die in quick succession in the 1980s, Jay Leno was talking on The Tonight Show, and he said, You know, they think that they're the toughest country on earth. He says, well, their guy gets a cold and within 2 weeks he's dead. Our guy takes a bullet in 2 days, he's up walking around. It was reference to Ronald Reagan. But things have really changed dramatically in perception of world leaders. So, President's coming to Idaho, and he's going to be at Boise State University today. There is a poll at our website. If you go there, newsradio1310.com, it is asking you if you have had any plans to go. Now, as I understand it, someone told me just late now that the tickets are all snapped up. They're using a small venue, so they don't have to be embarrassed by no one showing up. But the poll at our website asks if you plan to go or not. So this poll was put up a couple of days ago. Nearly 85% of the people say no. They're 9.28%, so a little over 9% of the people who were responding say that they have other plans, or it just says other. That would mean they're not going. So that puts us up in the neighborhood of 95%, or very close to it. And then 6% of those people who were polled said they are going. So good luck. I don't know that there'll be much room left if it's a 1,200-seat venue and if it's even that big. But it tells you that there really is a genuine lack of interest. And we talked about this yesterday, why the choice had been made on such a small venue, where they used to fill big arenas when he was speaking, when he was first running for president. Now they're relegated to coming in and talking in small theater settings. I'd like some of your responses to what you heard last night, or at least what you're hearing this morning about all of it. If you'd like, give me a shout here in just the next couple of minutes. In fact, we'll hear from some of our fine sponsors coming up in just a moment. But following that, feel free to give me a telephone call, 736-0300. You're listening to Top Story. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There was a point during this Dog and Pony show last night where the President got a raucous round of applause when he suggested that Americans should do their best if you're an employer to hire veterans, which, great slogan, great thought. And I was sitting there thinking just a few minutes earlier, the camera had panned the crowd and you saw Chuck Hagel. That's a veteran the president has fired. Oh, they call it a resignation, but Hagel was booted out the door because he objected to the way the president was handling this Islamic State issue. Remember, the president called those folks the JV squad? So another contradiction on the president's part. And I was just looking over a headline from a publication called God and the Machine. And the writer was saying he was reading comic books last night instead, because he said he's so sick and tired of these canned speeches, which are tested, audience tested and run through the ringer by consultants and the like. And it's just theater. He said it's an oligarch. And all they do every year is come out and they posturize, make some promises. In fact, there was a story yesterday that I happened to see a link to. Over the course of his presidency, Mr. Obama, in his State of the Union addresses, has made 112 promises that he has failed to keep. So it's theater. It's nothing more than that. And it's to try to whip up your side, supposedly to fight the other side, when the two sides really aren't a whole heck of a lot different. Now, he didn't delve into it too much, but he talked a little bit last night about internet freedom. On the 26th of February, his FCC is going to be voting to put restrictions on the internet. It's an underreported story, but they're talking about doing this. Now, this is the same president who told corporate America that he could do more to protect them, but they would have to surrender a lot of corporate secrets. So in other words, for your password, he will protect your internet. And by the way, his Federal Communications Commission will put new restrictions on it. But that'll keep you safer. You see, that's better for you. That way the government will know everything you do. And that way, if you even think or consider doing something the government doesn't want you to do, they can step in and lock you away. See how convenient that is? Have you ever heard of something called the strident conservative? I want to share something from that with you. And this is perhaps unrelated to last night's speech, at least not directly related, but I think it does speak volumes about where the people are right now in this country. It's 8:26, 25 right now. We're looking for a high of 30 today, warming up as the week does go on. So things will be, I would assume, at least a little bit better as the week goes on. More fog, of course, but we can deal with that since we've gotten used to it the last few weeks. Here's the headline from the Strident Conservative. David Leach, the writer, majority of Americans willing to surrender their constitutional rights. Following the recent attacks in France, an overwhelming majority of Americans have indicated in a Washington Post ABC News poll a willingness to surrender their privacy rights to the federal government in exchange for a little safety by a margin of nearly 2-1. 63% of Americans stated they would give up their personal privacy rights in order to help battle terrorism. Well, we've already done that with social media, I guess, so it's a done deal, right? 32% of respondents haven't been struck by an epidemic as of yet, the writer says. And it is a 6 percentage point increase from last year. And what happened was the situation in France may have created this, even though no Americans, to my knowledge, were killed in what happened in Paris a couple of weeks ago. But even a year ago, 57%. For you public school graduates, that's over half. Over a year ago, 57% of Americans said they would give up their liberties. Did you know there was a poll done about 10 years ago of America's college students, and it probably hasn't changed with the current crop? They were asked if they would, in exchange for having their student debt paid off by the government, if they would give up their right to vote for the rest of their lives. Now, I'm sure you'd like to be proud of your children and say, they would never do such a thing. But in that poll that was done, that was about 2004, 2005, I was talking about it on a radio show I was hosting way back then. The overwhelming majority of college students said they would give up those rights, the right to vote, in exchange for someone paying off their student loan debt. Well, what kind of a people are we any longer? What type of kids have we raised? I mean, we've gotten to this point. So these dog and pony shows where the president comes out and says, I'm for the little guy, and, some people sit on their hands and his side claps and cheers. Nobody's for the little guy. They're pressing you in every direction. And I don't understand how people can go along with this. And a number of people, I don't blame you if you didn't watch this last night. You're looking for a little escapism to get away from it. So you're watching some reality TV show. The ones that I used to have to sit through with my intended were Mob Wives and The Real Housewives of New Jersey. Anyway, they were just dreadful, but people do that, and it's an escape. But on the other hand, it's not helping us in any way. The longer your head is buried in the sand, it's like the child, when the house is on fire, who decides to curl up under the blanket or go into the closet thinking I'll be safe here. And if I just close my eyes, nothing will happen to me. Well, bad things will happen in that situation. I've got more on some of these topics coming up. Just quickly, I'd mentioned earlier, there is the source material for this. I mentioned it in the previous segment of the program. Obama spent more for dinner in Hawaii than his tax credits for families that he's promising. And that was just for one meal with his wife. They spent $295 apiece on their meal before they had drinks. Well, hey, he's for the little guy. Do as he says, not as he does. We've got plenty more coming up. I wanted to mention gas prices, if we could, for a few minutes. Trying to figure out where they're going, where they're headed, and who knows. More details, it's 8:30. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. Driving home from work last night, I tended to let my eyes wander a little bit. I know you're not supposed to do that in heavy traffic, but I was looking at some of the prices for gasoline and thinking, did I fall asleep, do just a mini Rip Van Winkle for a week and wake up and things have changed? Because I bought gasoline last Friday, filled up for about $1.50 a gallon. That was after my discount on my shopper's card. So I'm driving along yesterday. In fact, yesterday I saw one station that had prices down in the $1.55 range, and you were getting a nickel off or so if you paid cash. And the price had shot up to $1.89.9 yesterday morning, and this morning it was, I think, $1.79.9. Still, it's more than 20% or 20 cents higher per gallon in a few days. And the station where I bought gas the other day is up about 17 cents. So what happened in the span of just a few days with gasoline pricing? I know that oil went up a bit over the course of the end of last week, but did it go up that much that all of a sudden gasoline prices shot up 17 cents to $0.25 a gallon? Are we being played here? Here's a question for you. Does anyone have an answer to that? And help me out here on this one. And then since that time has happened, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that a bad IMF report, that's an International Monetary Fund report, that's a group of rich bankers who are trying to control the economy for who knows what reasons, they have downgraded the worldwide economic outlook for the year. In fact, they're talking recession, maybe a big one. And the Chinese have suddenly had a huge dip in the Chinese economy, the worst in years. In fact, here it is on this story from the Wall Street Journal. Adding to global growth concerns, China on Tuesday reported its slowest growth in a quarter century. China is the number 2 oil consumer and the top importer of oil. Okay, but the price of oil ended up going down again. It's below $47 a barrel. Well, I'm looking at this from the NYMEX crude dollars per barrel from something called Oil Watch, and there's actually call it a chart here that I'm looking at, and the chart is showing you exactly where the price went the last couple of days. So the price has actually dropped. What in blazes is going on here? Reach me if you can and share your thoughts on it at 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on air.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
About the gas prices, it does this all the time here in Idaho. I don't know about the rest of the country, but when gas comes down, it takes 2 to 3 weeks for it to come down in Idaho. But when it goes up just a few cents, boy, gas jumps right back up within 24 hours.
I'll tell you what, though, I've seen even some dramatic swings in prices. There's a travel center out the other side of Kimberly where the price last week was a good 80 cents a gallon higher than it was in Twin Falls on Blue Lakes Boulevard. But if you go downhill from Blue Lakes Boulevard and you check out some of the stations, I don't know, it's another 15, 20 cents higher there than it is just a couple of miles away. I have not been able to put all that together.
Well, when gas prices is fluctuating like it is right now, you will have quite a variance in prices. One thing that I think they ought to change or do something about is this 1/10. All prices that have the 1/10 on the end of it.
Yes.
Back when I was young and gas was 25 cents a gallon, 1/10 kind of meant something. But today, today's prices are $3 or $4 a gallon prices. It means absolutely nothing.
It's the same way. If a guy's selling an item for $1, if he posts it at 99 cents, people are much more likely to buy it. And I think that's why they leave the 9/10 on there. It makes it look like it's a penny cheaper.
Exactly right.
Right.
But the thing is, everybody is used to it. Everybody knows the scam, and it doesn't do any good anymore, I don't think.
I guess
we're going to buy gas anyway.
We're all going to be walking again in a few years and pedaling around on bicycles, just like our Chinese friends used to do. Thanks much for the calls. 8:38 now, and 25, looking for a high of 30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. So somebody told me a few years ago that the problem with gasoline prices, milk sometimes, we've seen swings in the price of milk over the years, but most people don't complain about it nearly as much as they do gasoline, because buying gasoline is a very psychological thing. When you're buying milk, you're not standing next to a meter that just is spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. When you're buying gasoline, on the other hand, you're standing there pumping your gas and you're looking at that price just keep racking along. You know, it's spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. It's like the national debt clock. You know, you could use it as a fan. And that psychological impact of that is why people get so irate with these fluctuations in gasoline prices. And if you went to the grocery store and if you were picking the milk out of the cooler, and you picked the milk up and it started, there was a meter that started spinning like that, you might have the same experience. That was the argument the fellow was trying to make with me. But with this drop now in the price per barrel again in the last couple of days, and with this terrible economic outlook coming, and you know, all of the folks last night who were the talking heads on the in mainstream media were saying that the economy is so much better and has turned the corner here in this country. And yet here you have people all over the world saying, uh-oh. But uh-oh means cheap gasoline. And perhaps we'll see the price per barrel soon down below $40. And then we can just sit back and wait for the next big price shock, which should come sometime in the next 12 months. At least that was one of the predictions we talked about this week from a former executive at Shell Oil. We've got more on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX at newsradio1310.com. Justice Ruth Bader Meinhof contradicts herself with a Supreme Court ruling. I referenced earlier one of the Supreme Court justices of the United States. Now, we should give her a pass. She's in her 80s, I believe now, early 80s. So it's not always easy for people to stay up well past their bedtime when they're my age. Imagine when you get to be 80 years old. But there's video this morning surfacing that Justice Ruth Bader Meinhof apparently dozed off during the president's address last night. And we know how she feels. I had some friends that used to own a small shop in a tourist town, and they said one summer this woman kept coming in, and they knew her as Ruthie. And she'd come in and buy little knickknacks and tourist items to give to friends. And they said they didn't realize until she took off in September that it happened to be the Supreme Court justice. And they said she was a nice enough woman and certainly spent a lot of money, so they didn't have any issues with that. So there's even in this uber liberal, there is an inner capitalist at work. She likes to keep the economy going in small tourist shops. 25 right now, looking for a high of 30. It's 8:45. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. If you're listening online, of course, you can listen to us anywhere in the world. Last summer, you may remember a case about a store called Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby was a business that was founded by a Christian family, and they still believe very much in their Christian faith, even in the workplace. And they balked at having to pay for what are called abortifacient drugs, drugs that would basically abort a developing embryo in a woman's uterus. And they felt that that ran counter to what they believed in. Well, the government said, sorry, the government's attitude is, from people who don't really believe in God or go to church and do those things, they just believe it's one of those things you do for an hour on Sunday in a closed box somewhere, and then you come out and you leave it behind for the rest of the week because, well, that's what they would do if they believed. So here you have these people who are trying to force the owners of Hobby Lobby against the conscience, really, of their religious beliefs to go along with this. I'm reminded of the line in the movie A Man for All Seasons where the character Thomas More is being questioned, and finally he's told, well, look, why don't you just sign on with the king's divorce for fellowship? And he looks at one of his inquisitors and says, well, if I do that and then I violate my conscience and I go to hell, will you all go there with me for fellowship? And he's asked, well, wait a minute, do you believe we're all going to hell for this? And he says, I can't answer for you, but I can answer from my own conscience. So that is what religious liberty is really all about. Well, Ruth Bader Meinhof and the other handsome ladies of the court, the liberal wing, they all decided last summer to vote against Hobby Lobby. It was late in the year, late in the term, in June. They voted against Hobby Lobby, but they were overruled. The court's so-called conservative wing won out that day with, I believe, a 5-4 ruling in favor of Hobby Lobby. Today in the Wall Street Journal, the Review and Outlook, that's what they call an editorial in that paper, it mentions that she did a flip in a case. A unanimous, that means all 9 justices, on Tuesday ruled in favor of a Muslim convict who wanted to keep a half-inch beard on religious grounds in violation of an Arkansas prison rule. Now, the prisons in Arkansas are worried that prisoners who grow long beards, beyond half an inch especially, could hide contraband in those beards. Look, it's been done, I'm sure, in the past. So they had a law against this, but the man claimed that because he was a Muslim, growing the beard was a tenet, at least to him, of his faith. So the court ruled 9-0 in favor of this prisoner. Now recall, the writer says, that 5 justices voted in favor of religious liberty in last year's Hobby Lobby case. The 4 liberals dissented, with Justice Bader Meinhof railing that forcing religious-minded business owners to offer insurance for abortion drugs was no violation of their religious liberty under the law. Justice Bader Meinhof joined the majority in this case, writing in a brief concurrence that the beard wouldn't, quote, detrimentally affect others who do not share, unquote, the convict's beliefs. So which one is it? Well, she likes abortion. So therefore, if you're opposed to it on religious grounds, you're a bad human being. On the other hand, if you're a Muslim who wants to grow a beard and you've committed crimes and are locked in prison perhaps for the rest of your life, you're good. That's the mindset of this woman. Now, she is likely going to be replaced soon. She is either going to retire for health reasons or for those very health reasons. We don't wish this on anyone, but I'm a believer that if it does happen, that if you were really a decent person and you followed certain rules in life, you will go somewhere even more pleasant. I'm not sure about that in her case. Do you know that the Supreme Court, 9 people, we talk about diversity. Al Sharpton argues we need diversity in Oscar nominations. Even if somebody didn't turn in a great acting performance, in order that the nominees look more like the American rainbow, that we need to have people of color nominated every year, even if they didn't have a good performance. Do you know that we don't have any Protestants on the U.S. Supreme Court at the moment? I think that's the case. I think that the overwhelming number of them are Roman Catholics, and you have some who are Jewish. In a country that if you still ask people what their religious faith is, you're still going to find a lot of Protestants. But as it turns out, not on the Supreme Court of the United States. And yet that doesn't necessarily affect the justice's views, or it does maybe in Ginsburg, her case, because she comes from a more liberal side of her religious faith, which is of a Jewish background. And so, I called her Bader Meinhof. I'm sorry. Well, that's the same thing. I mean, same type of political beliefs and all of that. But that's where she's coming from in all of this. This week, there will be 500,000 people, at least in Washington, for the March for Life. And I don't know how they can continue to ignore this event. I went 3 years ago, And I remember as I was on a bus trip, and we went to Washington. It had snowed there the previous few days, and then it had warmed up to the point where it was about 40, 45 degrees, misty, and everything was covered in mud. But I was down front by the stage, and I got to hear all of the speeches, and then marched up Capitol Hill, past the Capitol building to the Supreme Court. And there were, at that day, an estimated 400,000 of us. Media didn't bother to cover it. Media ignored the whole event going on that day. Oh, there might have been a perfunctory, they're back this year, a couple of short headlines, with a couple of lines after that. But I was there among that crowd, and let me tell you, the majority of the people who were there that day, I was among the old timers. I was marching up the hill with a 79-year-old priest and my future brother-in-law, and I mentioned to the priest who's had open heart surgery and a couple of knees replaced, if he thought it would be, if he was, should he be doing this? And he said, look, if I die here, I think I'll go to heaven. Perhaps, that's a good way to look at that. We have a caller with us, and we should note, too, most of the people who were there were school children. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I heard correctly. If I didn't, then straighten me out. But did you equate the Jewish religion and laws to the Germans?
Did I mention Germans?
Did
I say Germans at any point this morning?
You said Meinhof.
Ruth Bader Meinhof.
Yeah.
Do you know what the Bader Meinhof gang was?
No, I was just asking you if that was.
Do you know what the meaning of Bader Meinhof is?
I just want you to answer my question, not educate me.
Well, I don't know that I'm required to answer your question, but if you need an education, Bader Meinhof gang was a group of communist terrorists. Are you with me? Hello? Hello? Could you tell in the nervousness in his voice? His throat was shaking, and he's just looking, I'm going to call that conservative, anti-Semitic. I'm going to get him. Ooh, ooh. You know what? Do your research before you call me, pal. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's very similar to the name Bader Meinhof, which was a communist terrorist network in West Germany in the 1970s. And they went around killing industrialist government officials or anybody else who got in their way. Far left-leaning people and very violent. And I think that when I say Ruth Bader Meinhof tongue-in-cheek, I think you might be able to pick up, if you know the history, what I'm talking about. You're up next with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's up?
Hey, I hear you're laughing, mocking the president because he said you said people don't show up and this and that. He doesn't have. Well, how the mighty have fallen. You were in Delaware, and look at where you were at. There's more cows than people.
Well, I'll tell you what, where I was in Delaware, there were more fish than people. I thank you for the call, sir. Yes. All hail President Obama, my Lord and Savior. I just don't get where you liberals come from on this. There are greater deities that exist. You're up next. And a good morning to you at 8:54.
Hey, good morning. I was interested in the comment from your caller previous to this last one. He tipped his hand by indicating that he's not interested in education. He's only interested in commenting on what he believes he understands. And as he's proven, he doesn't understand much. Bader Meinhof is pretty well known by those that read the newspaper and have paid attention through the years.
Yeah.
So, and I have giggled at your referring to the justice in that way. However, I would like us to not give her a hard time. I would like to see her stay in office until we get through the next election, because it's hard to believe, but I think that our current president could find somebody at least as liberal, if not more liberal, to take her place.
Yeah, I think that that's a possibility, but he has to get it through the Senate. And right now, a lot of people in that Senate remember 20-some years ago, almost 30 years ago, when the so-called Roman Catholics in Kennedy and Biden stonewalled some nominees for the U.S. Supreme Court because they were more interested in liberal votes than where they were going after death. I think that any attempt to put someone along the same mindset as Bader Meinhof on the court again is going to fail.
Oh, I pray that is the case, because they have undone so much of what most of us in this state hold near and dear in just the last few years.
I agree. And I thank you much for the call. We have to have somebody with courage. And whoever the president would nominate in the next couple of years will have some difficult time sailing through that new makeup of the U.S. Senate. Your vote did count in that, at least in that sense. You're up next on Top Story. It's 8:55 on News Radio 1310 KLIX with Bill Colley.
Good morning. You know, all these people that are calling in, Lennon would have referred to them as useful idiots. I just want to know, for all the progressives and liberals out there, what is wrong with freedom? What's wrong with freedom? Why do they hate it so much?
Because they know so much more than everybody else. They have to control the rest of us to show us the way.
The problem is they know so many things that just aren't so. And that's, that's Ronald Reagan's quote, and it stands the test of time. Just the rigid ideologue that we have in there as president, I can't bear it anymore. This country's coming to a boiling point, and it's done on purpose.
Oh, yeah. I heard that in the Rush Morning Update. Thank you for the call. The Rush Morning Update today, Rush Limbaugh was saying pretty much the same thing when he was talking about incestuous relationships and this family member, a woman who wants to move in with her dad to New Jersey, where apparently it's illegal so they can continue it. And he said, we told people this was going to happen. Oh, no, there's no slippery slope. You conservatives, you just belly aching and you're angry because you're bigots and racists and homophobes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 8:57, I believe we have a caller with us. You're on the air. Good morning. All right, well, let's try one more. We're coming up close to the 8 o'clock news in just a moment. That'll be a hard break. But in the meantime, you're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. I just wanted to comment on Jill's best friend. I think that Obama last night gave an eloquent speech. He talked very well. He actually made a couple good comments. But, when you cook your books, you can admit all kinds of stuff. And I noticed every time he talks, he says that the economy is better, and it gets further and further back. It went to 2006, and last night it was 1999. They're just absolutely insane. He lied after lied after lied after lie. The economy is not better, and the stock market's better. If you put so many $1 billion of our tax money in there every month, it's going to get better. And the rich are going to get richer. So he hates the rich, but he made them rich. Off of our back.
Yeah, I thank you much for the call. We talked about it the other day. We have more children now in the 50 states in poverty than ever before, at least since those records have been kept and they've had a poverty line that they've defined. We have another $7.5 trillion added to the national debt since Mr. Obama became president. That's more than a third of it. You tell me, are we better off now than we were 7 years ago? I think that's a question that most people could answer. News is coming up next from Fox. One more hour of Top Story with Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and also online anywhere around the world at newsradio1310.com. We were talking in the last hour, just before we actually went to the news break, and we were mentioning how we're seeing the dissolution of this culture before our own eyes, and that all of those people who kept telling us, relax, you're making too much noise, just be quiet over there, you're walking around dragging your knuckles again, you people with non-opposable thumbs, you're just a bunch of bigots and racists, and you're mean-spirited. And yet, here we go again. We're seeing more and more of the veneer of civilization being stripped away, leaving us with, I guess, just people running around in the streets doing whatever they please, and everything will be okay. There's even a line of thought that says that we shouldn't be prosecuting people for violent crimes such as homicides because there may be issues in their brains, and therefore, you're hearing all of these things coming out of academia that says that we don't have anyone responsible for their own decisions, their own choices, that we need to take care of everybody. There was a fellow yesterday who posted something online he was with one of the major conservative publications, and I happened to see it. It was a tweet from one of his friends who said she thought that we should outlaw war. Well, that was tried with the Kellogg Brilliant Pack back in the 1920s. How well did that work? The problem is, you may say, well, I'm not going to do it then, but the other guy may say, I am going to war. Then what do? Put your head in the sand again and pretend nothing's going on around you? And the comments section was tremendous, but I posted that I said there's one way that we could actually guarantee this, but we would need one world government. And that one world government would pretty much have to keep everyone in line with a North Korea-style police state. And that's how you would outlaw war from here on out. Essentially, you would just have a government making war on the people. But there would be no more wars because you would only have the one government. That would be at least the inkling in that. Unless there was a faction that popped up. Again, people on the left, They are living in la-la land. You know, they've smoked so much ganja. Do you know that in the states that have legalized marijuana, Newsweek is reporting this week that there are all of these explosions taking place in apartment complexes. They actually had a photograph of one in Washington State where the entire apartment, the walls had blown right out and took part of a neighboring apartment along too. They're cooking marijuana so they can extract the oils from it because they think they get a more intense high. And since the legalization of dope in those two states, the number of explosions are going sky high, no pun intended. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the, what do they call it, the hashish oil? They're trying to get the hash oil as concentrated as they can. So here you go again. This is going to be a good thing. It'll be medicinal and people can do what they please. And you know what? Don't smoke cigarettes, but smoke up all the hash you want. And go ahead and blow the neighbor's house up too while you're at it. What's the logic in all of this? Is there any? If there is logic, then it is obviously an effort to try and destroy all of this on purpose, as a caller said to us just before the 8 o'clock news. Or 9 o'clock news, excuse me. It's in fact 10 minutes after 9 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Here's something that I've got to share with you. I got a reaction from a friend of mine. He is the former administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission. He's going to be on the air with us in a few days to talk about that event because he was privy to all of the evidence, a lot of things that, most people never saw at the time. And he was part of the team that presented the report to President Reagan in the Rose Garden after it was finished. But he saw this on my Facebook page today, and he was just incensed. He served his country for 20 years in the Air Force, and I think he is just fed up with this. This is out of the Daily Caller. Dad banned from games after telling kids to shut up during the national anthem. This is out of Ohio, I believe, near Cleveland, Ohio. Brookside High School. The man's name is Justin Schill. He has kids who go to school at Brookside, and he was there for a basketball game. He was attempting to enjoy the game when he saw some kids. They were chatting and laughing and generally having too swell of a time during the customary presentation of the national anthem. So as the anthem was playing, they were goofing off. So he was not terribly happy about what he was seeing and about the lack of respect. So he approached the kids and gave them his version of the what for. In other words, he told them off. He got kicked out of the game. A few days later, he received a letter from the Brookside High principal informing him that he would be banned from school athletic events for all of the calendar year 2015. Why? Because he told these children that they should be showing more respect during the national anthem. Apparently, the school doesn't think so. He's the one who's going to catch grief for all of this. What type of... the old question, why can't Johnny read? It's because of these dinglings who are running the schools in the first place. Monkey see, monkey do. All of these... Then they wonder, then they get angry that news media picks it up. And they blame Fox News, they blame the Daily Caller. You're the stupid idiot who wouldn't defend this guy for defending the national anthem. And then when you have a crowd show up at the school board meeting, they'll say, no, I want you to all be polite and don't call me any names while I sit here and take your abuse. Well, you're going to be abused. You're going to have a couple of thousand parents come out and tell you off for something like this. And these administrators, coming, of course, out of the colleges that pipe out all the Marxist-Leninism and the Alinskyeites who work there, they don't apparently understand why there's so much anger when they make a ridiculous decision like this. It's 9:12. You're up next on 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Hey, Bill, I think you're right. I think that what they're doing is they're just making sure that people don't, that these kids don't respect anything of the past. Like in these schools, these kids have no education on history, and that's why that is a prime way to take over a society. Is just your history means nothing to you. I mean, and what history is now is just the present. This is whatever you want. And like you said, just like Limbaugh said this morning on that update, I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah.
About marriage. But I think 70 million people in the heartland are fed up with this stuff. I really do. And I think these coastal cities are going to, eventually they're going to just, I don't know what's going to happen to
them. When they break off into their own independent countries and then they go bankrupt, we're not going to be there to help them out. They can no longer rob us to keep their welfare states going.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
I thank you for the call. That is related, that story about the Star-Spangled Banner, very much to this so-called controversy about the movie American Sniper. which is a movie about a guy who is protecting his fellow Americans' lives in a war zone. Look, if you had a husband, a wife, a son, a brother, an aunt, someone serving in one of these war zones, and there were people taking pot shots at them, wouldn't you want someone like Chris Kyle around to protect them? That was his job. And a movie has been made about it. Well, he was mean and he called the enemy savages. Well, the enemy was blowing up school children, for crying out loud. What else are you going to call them? Oh, but we have to respect their culture. They're shooting dead young boys for watching soccer games. The other day, they took two men who may, stress may, have been gay, and they threw them off the top of a minaret to their deaths. But we can't call them savages. That wouldn't be nice. And Chris Kyle is just a Nazi, and it's a good thing he was killed by that sick man in Texas. Where are you lefties coming from? If he had saved the life of one of my loved ones, I'll tell you what, that guy's a hero. How about Lieutenant Colonel Allen West? Drummed out of the military, forced into an early retirement, because they had discovered that an Iraqi policeman that his unit was working with was actually a plant, a mole, and he was giving away details on the unit's movements, which was allowing the bad guys, and if they're killing Americans, they're bad guys, they were killing Americans. So West brought this guy in for interrogation. When the guy wouldn't speak, they had a fire pit right next to the area where that's how you test a weapon. You have a pit filled with sand. You can shoot into it. That way you don't blow somebody's feet off or shoot off into the distance and hit someone that you didn't intend to hit. West pulled out his pistol, his service pistol, and he fired it next to the guy's head, but in the direction of the sand pit, the firing pit, which properly is what you're supposed to do. And with that, the fellow that he was talking to spilled his beans. And he gave them everything they needed to know. After that, there was never, ever another attack on any of West's men in that sector. But the Army, under pressure from liberals in Washington, said, oh, that was mean, I don't care if our boys and girls are getting killed. You, on the other hand, Colonel, were mean to that spy. They threw Colonel West into the brig. And the only reason he ever got out was because the story broke in the Washington Times and was picked up by talk radio. And then all of a sudden, the Libby mind controllers in Washington backed down. Now, I don't know how much longer we're going to be able to do this to them because they're trying to get rid of all of us because they don't want us telling everyone else what's really going on. And with that, West was told, all right, we'll make a compromise. We'll let you out of the brig, but you have to resign. And he did that. And after he got elected to Congress, he was only in a term before he was hunted out because, again, the libs kept saying, oh, he's a mean-spirited, terrible human being, and he's a sellout to his race. He's a traitor to his black race, and he's an Uncle Tom, and they gave you all of that. No, he is an American hero. He put on a uniform, he went into a dangerous war zone, and he saved American lives. And the fact of the matter is, you've got at least half the country that dislikes him. They dislike Chris Kyle. They dislike the national anthem. Do you know that CNN one day last week warned its audience? You see this happen on network newscasts. They'll say, oh, just a reminder, before this story, a warning. There will be graphic content and blood. Send your children out of the room. You've heard that before, right? CNN gave a warning and said, just to let you know before this story comes on, it is going to include the national anthem. I am not making this up. It has been documented in the Daily Caller and other news sources this last week. I am not making it up. Why did they say that? Because it says bombs bursting in air. Oh, good golly, it's about war. Yeah, and how the nation was saved. Yeah, but they talk about the flag being still there, and that flag is bad, bad, bad. I want to burn it. If not, I need to urinate on it. I don't understand the leftist mindset. I never will. And unfortunately, most lefties, as I said earlier, they're not what you'd call God-fearing people. One of these days, they won't wake up, or when they do come to, they're going to find that they need to shovel a coal for a hot reception where they're going. And I don't care if it hurts their feelings. Take a Valium then. We're not, this whole I'm okay, you're okay thing that has been preached in schools and by your fellow travelers for the last 50 years has done nothing to hold the cohesion of this country, to hold the country together cohesively. It's all been to destroy and tear down. And in their mind, every little last thing about this country is wrong. And at some point, and I admit that, I complain just as much about the Republicrats as some other people do, and the big money financing most political races in this country, and the fact that the government is just trying to encircle us with all of its new invasions of privacy. But you know what? In the last 240 some years, there were actually some great heroes in this country. And a couple of times in the last century, it was men and supported by women from the United States that saved Western civilization. Got more coming up. Some climate change discussion ahead. World is going to fry to a crisp any day now. Stay tuned. You're listening to Top Story on 1310 KLIX. So I was thinking about it this week. We have, I think, an argument we could make that the two greatest Americans who ever lived were George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And when I was a boy growing up, the birthdays of both of those men were holidays. Not any longer. Because in the interest of diversity, we had to put a holiday in and eliminate their birthday holidays. So now we have something called President's Day, which I'm not even sure is officially a holiday, which means that you now have Washington and Lincoln lumped in with Pearson, Buchanan, and some other ne'er-do-wells, Bill Clinton, and I'm sorry, but you look at this list and Jerry Ford, none of whom are people you would compare to Washington and Lincoln if you were looking at what those two men accomplished in their lives, with the odds that really were stacked against them. And I'm not knocking the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think that he was a man who really believed in what he was doing, and I'll tell you what, I think that he had a tremendous amount of courage. But did he do for the United States what Lincoln and Washington did? There would be no United States without General Washington. My friend Bruce Chadwick actually wrote 2 books about Washington, the First American Army and George Washington's War. He used to be a regular on one of my radio shows with me. And Bruce points out that Washington just had some unique skills that no one else had at the time that allowed him, against all odds, to lead a country to independence. And then you've got Lincoln, who there's a public service announcement that airs on radio stations about what an utter failure this guy happened to be at most everything he tackled in life. And then he was able, and you know what, he suspended habeas corpus. It's funny what happens in wartime. Presidents either lock up people of Japanese descent or they suspend habeas corpus when the capital is filled with spies. And I can argue that some of these things weren't very constitutional that they did, but you know what? We're probably better with one United States of America today than the 2 countries we would have ended up with. And yet we had to shelve the holidays for those 2 men because somebody's feelings somewhere might be hurt. So we no longer honor perhaps the 2 greatest Americans who ever lived. It's 9:26. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach the program if you'd like to comment on particularly any of my rants today, 736-0300. Once more, that number is 736-0300. And I did briefly mention MLK Day on Monday. I don't know that it's really terribly applicable in the state of Idaho. For a lot of people, it was just a day off and they could go to the mall and the like. But we also have another big day this week, and that is the one March for Life in Washington. And I think that is far more important and critical because of the 60 million dead babies. But again, liberals think that's okay. That's just another form of convenience. You're on the air. Good morning, and you're on News Radio 1310, KLIX.
Yes, Bill, I've been very busy, and I was able to hear earlier this morning. Did you happen to talk about Obama coming to town?
Yes.
Voice. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that he's going to. I pointed out he wouldn't have a big crowd, and somebody got angry with me and said, well, you're working in Idaho. You don't have one either. And I thought, well, he's working in Idaho, and he has to piggyback off my show, and English is a second language for him. I don't know that he really could talk.
Well, not without his teleprompter.
Yes.
One of the things that he likes to take credit for, and everybody's been, as the unemployment rate drops, and then, of course, the price of gas drops, and I think those things are very relative. I think that, as the price of gas drops, of course, people have more money to spend on things other than gas, and they can afford to hire more help, do lots of things, go on trips, whatever it is. But when he takes credit for the price of gas being low and the unemployment rate being low, and what I believe is after 6 years of this debacle and this fraud and this lying SOB, that, the people of America, the resiliency of the American people, the American spirit, and the American businessman is the reason why these things are occurring. It has nothing to do with this fraud. And but you see, when you have fools, it's easy to fool them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And they managed to do it twice in 2008 and 2012. Thanks much for the call. 9:29, you're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Of course, you can have low unemployment numbers, but your good friends at MSDNC, over at the Clinton News Network, CNN, and at the New York Times and the Washington Post, Pravda on the Potomac, maybe even at the Times News, they fail to tell you about what's called labor force participation. Well, okay, we're at an all-time record with that, the low that we have currently. Why? Because that jobless rate is based on the people who are actually collecting jobless benefits, unemployment insurance, which runs out after 26 weeks. And then when they don't get that any longer, they're no longer counted. But if they haven't gone back to work, so the real unemployment rate might be 22%. But we're being sold a bill of goods, and you know what? Media colludes with that. This is the sad part of it. The folks in establishment media are down on their knees for this guy every day trying to protect him. Why? Because he's a fellow traveler. He supports everything that they do, and that is the destruction, not only of the country, but of our culture, our way of life. Because in their minds, they're going to simply turn around and rebuild their paradise after that's all done. These are very, very dangerous people. It's 9:30. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Top story. The global warming alarmists are at it again. If I get a chance in the next half hour, we'll tell you about some of their missteps, too. I should note that with all of this global warming alarmism taking place, we're not going to break 30 degrees today. At least that's the current forecast, and we'll likely be within a couple of degrees of that. 27 right now. It does feel like winter. And for all of this talk that we kept hearing, 25 years ago, people were saying that the world wouldn't be around in 10 or 15 years, and of course, that deadline passed. It's like, all right, we're going to draw a new line here. Okay, forget that one. Let me draw a new line here. Rats. All right, we're going to draw a line here. And if you just listen to me and stop consuming and stop driving and get rid of your children, well, the world will be a much better place. Brave New World, the book written by Huxley. You see it coming true on an almost daily basis. So you hear all of these people on the left screaming about global warming. They don't talk about what if it's a natural thing? How do we go about dealing with it? Bjorn Lomborg, who's a scientist who writes, he's frequently the contrarian in the Washington Post in its Outlook section on Sundays. He's been writing for years saying, well, stop yammering about it and just figure out how we adjust to it. It'll be a lot cheaper, and you won't have to starve half the population. And he gets ignored and pushed aside by the folks on the left because they prefer to destroy all people who actually create jobs in order to get their wish. Because those people who create jobs, they're oppressive capitalists. So we can't obviously have that. 9:35, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Today's Wall Street Journal, Holman W. Jenkins Jr., climate reporting's hot mess. Now, you remember last week we heard the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA, reported that 2014 was the hottest year on record by a smidgen. Yes, a smidgen. And there are people, though, who doubt that. It is impossible. In fact, he mentions an organization called Berkeley Earth, which you can probably guess it's coming out of Berkeley, California. They're not journalists, and they're not climate deniers. They are people who actually go along with a lot of this, but they looked at it, the researchers there, and said the hottest year candidates, 2005 and 2010. The difference was smaller than the margin of error by a factor of 5, adding, therefore, it is impossible to conclude from our analysis which of 2014, 2010, or 2005 was actually the warmest year. So in other words, there are a group of scientists right now who are saying, don't get too alarmist about this just yet. Jenkins goes on to talk about how it was covered, though, in the media. And he says the AP committed a howler by claiming that, quote, 9 of the 10 hottest years in NOAA global records have occurred since 2000. The odds of this happening at random are about 650 million to 1, according to University of South Carolina statistician John Grego, unquote. All right. So they threw a number out there and said that the odds would be against this happening. The writer then says, and he's not a scientist, but he's able to just look at this and make a conclusion, and most scientists would too. This might be true, he writes, if Earth's climate were dice, where rolling a 6 has no effect on the odds of the next roll being a 6. But climate is a continuous process of incremental change. A unified theory of media idiocy on climate is beyond the scope of this column, but even someone with the apparently parched intellect of an AP editor should be able to look at NOAA data and notice that cool years are grouped with cool years and warm years with warm years, and in between years with in between years. Uh, uh, some guy at AP now is trying to put it all together. It's processing very slowly, though. We have another caller with us. 937 on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX, News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley with you. You're up next.
Yes, Bill. Do you notice how he said last night some of the brightest minds out there has discerned? Well, my mind's not bright, and I will agree that the climate is changing. I disagree on how it's happened. Climate has changed throughout the eternity. It's always changing. A dry place becomes wet, a wet place becomes dry. It happens all the time. And I heard a guy the other day says, these guys with global warming are right because it has slowly been getting warm since the ice age.
It has. For 12,000 years, 12,000 years, we've seen, if you look at it, there have been some setbacks and there have been some mini ice ages, but the average over the last 12,000 years, since coming out of the ice age, the world has been getting warmer. Wouldn't you know that probably is what precipitated the end of the ice age?
Yeah, but who was it, Bill? Al Gore, that says that the ice cap was supposed to be gone by now. It's thicker now.
Yeah, Iceland and the ice caps.
So, what happened to those bright minds? Something went wrong in their
well, he said
their computer modeling.
If I'm correct, he said at one point in that reference to global warming, all, of our brilliant scientists or bright scientists, all. But again, he can't speak for all, and it isn't all because there are about 40,000 who have signed on to a paper otherwise.
Well, I think the thing that's funny the most is he says the most brightest mind. But the most brightest minds to them is whoever agrees with them.
Yes.
The other side that says, no, this is not happening, this is a natural event that goes round and round, they're not bright, they're stupid.
No, they want their fellow travelers to fall in line, and they want to tell you if you don't, there's something wrong with you. Fellow travelers good, conservatives bad. Simple as that. Thanks for the call. Coming up on 940. 27, looking for a high of 30. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Speaking of Mr. President, wait until you hear what his Environmental Protection Agency has been doing to young children in California. Oh, it makes me shudder. It's very similar to those experiments carried out by some regimes in the 1940s. Now, the EPA is supposedly an organization, if you're on the left side of the perspective, is there to protect the planet from all of us evildoers who would deny climate change and drive large automobiles around, four-wheel drive, eat too much and be too flatulent, whatever it is they feel is destroying the planet. And they have plenary power, which means they don't have to answer to anyone. So they don't answer to voters, they don't answer to legislators. Maybe their budget could be toyed with, but for the most part, government has turned around and created a government within a government that operates, well, like an organized crime outfit. Let me share this story with you from the Daily Caller. The EPA, backed by experiments done at the University of Southern California and the University of California, Los Angeles, that exposed children aged 10 to 15 to diesel exhaust, an air pollutant which the EPA and California Air Resources Board says has no safe exposure limit. The EPA went ahead and did this. And so the Daily Caller got someone to talk about this on the other end. Quote, not only has EPA been caught violating the letter and spirit of virtually every national and international code, law, and regulation for the protection of human subjects in medical experiments developed since World War II, unquote, said David Schneer, an attorney with the Energy and Environmental Law Institute. Quote, they have done so in shocking style, abusing the most vulnerable people of all, children, unquote. So the EPA, run by some of America's favorite liberals, has been exposing young children in California, and maybe perhaps nationwide, we've learned about California, that's all so far, to poison. Quote, compounding the basic villainy of this experimentation itself, unquote, Schneer added, quote, is that the USC UCLA researchers failed to warn the parents and children how dangerous EPA and CARB had determined diesel exhaust to be, so there was no informed consent as required by law, unquote. In other words, Mom and Dad weren't asked by the government, can we poison your children? They didn't know. They weren't told about it. Who knows? Maybe they were told, oh, we're giving your children sweets. Send them by for a few hours. And then they filled them full of the exhaust fumes. Now, Somebody brought up Germany earlier, and I guess they were referencing Nazi Germany and the Zyklon B and the medical experiments and Dr. Mengele. And of course, the Japanese were doing this in World War II on Chinese and, yes, even English-speaking prisoners. And we are horrified by these crimes. Yet the Environmental Protection Agency, of which President Barack Hussein Obama he's ultimately the guy where the buck stops. He appoints the chief of that organization. These are outlaws. These are gangsters. And yet, these are also the people who are telling us the world is coming to an end because of our own human activity. I guess this is their way of culling the herd. Poison the children, you don't have to worry about it. 947. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX, also newsradio1310.com. You can reach the program today at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Do want to mention Governor Reverend Mike Huckabee, or Reverend Governor Mike Huckabee, is coming up shortly. And the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You heard from them just a minute ago. Their number, 736-6563. And my number, 736-0300. You're up next on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Am I on?
You certainly are. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Hey, appreciate you coming on. I haven't listened to the show for a couple of years now because, Kelly was all right. He couldn't argue the points against Jill. I mean, Jill would set him up so easy because she was extremely a shield for the left. And but you're a breath of fresh air, and I'm glad you're there. So I'll start listening to the show again.
Well, thank you much for the call. Filling the shoes of Kelly is a bit like Danny White filling in for Roger Staubach. I can only hope to try to do my best. But Jill was angry at me one day before, when I was sitting in with the two of them. She was really angry because they were talking about the top stories that they had covered over the last 6 years. And one of them was a DUI that had befallen one of our 2 U.S. senators from Idaho. And they were talking about that story on the air. We went to commercial break, so this did not go over the air. And I said, well, at least he didn't drown anyone. Oh, my goodness. I picked the scab on that one because Mr. Kennedy was one of her heroes from her home state. And yes, he not only got drunked up, but he drove off. He took a young woman who was not his wife. We can't fully understand. We weren't there what may have been going on between the two of them. We do know from reports of people who were at the party, though, that they were really drunked up. And we also know that the Kennedy boys didn't take their marriage vows very seriously whatsoever. So Mr. Kennedy got all drunked up, and he got this young woman in a car, and they went for a very long ride on a short bridge because she still hasn't come back from it. And he dunked her in the water. He left her there in the car to drown. He swam away. He waited 10 hours to report it so he could sober up and then tried to make up several excuses. And you know what? The people of that Marxist-Leninist republic that he called Massachusetts, they continued to send him back every 6 years, over and over and over again. You know that his brother, John, there was a story out a few years ago about a woman who claimed that she had an affair with President Kennedy while he was in the White House, and Secret Service knew about it because it occurred in the pool. And they just ignored that. Media said, well, they had the woman on and interviewed her about how exciting that must have been. But she was underage. It was statutory rape. Governor Huckabee is up next. And the Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. Just a couple of minutes left before we wrap up today's edition of Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I believe we have a caller with us. You're on the air.
Hi, yeah. I don't know. I might have fallen behind a little waiting on the phone because I was listening online, and that's behind everything else. But you're talking about Jill and that little incident with Ted Kennedy and Mary Jo Catechny. I don't know if you realize, a few years ago, Jill was on there. Jill's a stand-up comedian also, believe it or not. She won a local competition. And a few years ago, she herself was making Ted Kennedy jokes on the air. She said, and this is as a stand-up comedian, I don't think it was true. She goes, I was at a party with Ted Kennedy once, and he asked me if I wanted to ride home, and I said, no, thanks, I don't swim. So I think she was a little bit, her righteous indignation was a little bit feigned if she was getting on you for talking about Ted Kennedy.
I thank you. Yeah, she mocked my laugh when I was talking about it, but didn't bother me too much. I just, one of those things that coworkers occasionally do clash. She's a smart cookie, I will give her that. And I could see her winning a competition along those lines, too. You're next. It's 9:56, and a good morning to you. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story.
There's a good reason.
Yeah.
There is a good reason to tune in to our TV today to watch Obama. A local girl who attends Boise State, Tess Gregg, has been chosen to sing the national anthem. She is a theater and music student and an outstanding young woman, and people around here will recognize that name, I'm sure. Tess Gregg will sing the national anthem today. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that nobody talks during it, because if you upbraid them for talking during it, you could end up being the one who gets punished. So we do have to be careful about that. I don't know how. I have been in some places before where the pledge has started, the national anthem has started. I've been in the back of the room talking. I'll tell you what, it gets your attention very quickly. And that's usually where everything just stops. And so give the girls some respect today. The difficult part about being in Boise today is the traffic, which I'm told isn't fun to drive in as it is already. It might be a little bit more difficult this afternoon with the president being there. A couple of other quick notes before we wrap up today. He gave the speech last night, which was, somebody said, reminiscent of what Elizabeth Warren would do if she were the president. God help us. But it is reminiscent of a lot of the old liberal plaudits that we've been hearing for the last 50 years. Charles Lane, columnist at the Washington Post, says, "We are a country trapped in 1965's ambitions." And according to him, we are unable to find the way out of that morass. And he said it's cost us billions and billions and billions of dollars. And what have we accomplished over the last 50 years? Is it a better country today than it was when you were a kid growing up? I know what it was like for me, and I know my dad, who worked in a factory, and my mom, she left her job for a while to raise the kids and stay home. My dad had a new car every couple of years, and we lived in a big house, and we went on some nice vacations. Most people today look at that and they think, what world were you living in? Again, is it a better planet now? Is it a better country, especially now, than the one that you grew up in? And we have spent trillions of dollars in trying to make it better with no true results. Just a thought. Rush Limbaugh is up between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock today, followed by Sean Hannity this afternoon. My name is Bill Colley. God willing and the creek don't rise, I will be back here tomorrow between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning. In the meantime, Fox News is first, followed by Rush. Thanks for joining me.